Hi, welcome to AI Confidential, a show about AI and how to benefit from it responsibly. I'm Aaron Fulkerson, the CEO of Opaque.
And I am Mark Hinkle, publisher of the Artificially Intelligent Enterprise.
Are you in a lair underground, Mark? Are you in your villainous lair?
I am in my van down by the river.
And I live in a van down by the river.
I wish it was a van down by the river, but I'm in a van on top of a mountain in northern Pennsylvania.
What mountain?
I'm calling it Mount Hinkle. I don't know what the real name is, but it's where my folks have a little cabin, and I'm in my little RV van hanging out for the week, and then we're going to the Finger Lakes in New York next to hang out with my sister, brother, and the rest of my family.
The Finger Lakes. I think of that SNL skit with the Finger Lakes.
Now to take us out is a sister act from the Finger Lakes.
So I have a van in Pennsylvania story. When I was 18, I hitchhiked from the Florida Keys, Big Pine Key, Florida, to somewhere in, I think it was Ford City, Pennsylvania. But I was out in the woods, and I hitchhiked with a witch and a Hell's Angel in their van.
Did you say a
right
witch?
Up there? Yeah. She was a self-proclaimed witch. She seemed pretty witchy to me. She was kind of like Stevie Nicks.
Stevie Nicks' doppelganger, the self-proclaimed witch, a Hell's Angel, and Aaron Fulkerson get into a van.
I hitchhiked up from Big Pine Key to Ford City, and then I lived in a cabin in the hills. They call them mountains, but they're really more like hills. I lived in a cabin with no running water. There was a pump outside and no bathroom for 3 months before moving to Minnesota. That's my Pennsylvania story.
Made you the man you are today.
Well, let's talk about Marco Palladino, because he's our guest today. He's the CTO and co-founder of Kong. They're the leading provider of open source API and service lifecycle management platforms. The best part is I hit him on Perplexity, and he's such a handsome guy, and he's got this adorable dog in his arms.
I met him and Augie, his co-founder, when they were first starting out. A friend of mine from cloud.com was their COO at the time. Now he's their SVP of alliances, but in their office, I think it was the first time I ever walked into an office with a dog, and they wanted to go to dinner, and I'm rolling around on the floor playing with the dog the whole time, thinking it was the coolest thing ever. But, they came to the US from Italy and did the real startup thing from really humble beginnings, and now they're a multi-billion-dollar company. And I don't think they even need the open source leader in API management. I think they probably are the leading independent API management vendor today.
Well, it couldn't happen to a better group of people, for sure. It's kind of like Joe from Crew AI too. It's like you just root for these good guys, and he's sincerely seems like one of them. All right, before we get into Marco, let's jump into AI in context. And one of the things that has been a recurring theme for, I guess, over a year now, but it's something we should discuss more deeply, is what is an LLM gateway and why do we need it?
So, the first time I saw it in action was with Ruve, who was our first guest this season. And he was using an LLM gateway to switch between models in his programming interface. So he was using, Aider and 2 or 3 other models for him to code. And based on the context of what he was coding, Aider, I think, does more of like the formatting and things like that, where he was using Claude for developing code and things. And I think that's the design pattern that we're going to see in the long term. And that's sort of what Kong enables, is an LLM.
Hey, I feel offended because I walked you through an LLM gateway, the confidential gateway that Opaque prototyped back in June of 2023. And you don't remember that one first? Jerk.
You know what? You did do that. I forgot. His was, Ruve has the showmanship. I think that I saw the concept in yours and I'm like, that's cool. But he's like in like 5 minutes created like 40,000 lines of code. And I'm like,
Yeah, I know.
that's
I
cool.
mean, gosh, when we first came out with the opaque gateway, which it's, you'll hear like LLM switchboard. Well, let me start with the reason why it's so valuable is the cost and quality of models is constantly changing, constantly evolving, right? So today it might be Claude, tomorrow it might be Mistral, and the dynamics of the quality of the models, the cost of the models is frequently changing, and then furthermore, we are seeing specialized models and small language models that are far more effective at specific tasks than large language models. There's a great paper from Apple about this too. In fact, the large language models capabilities for reasoning actually are poorer than mixture of experts, which are combined specialized models. So by having a switchboard, you have the flexibility to route to an appropriate agent or model, dependent upon what the task is at hand, right? So that's kind of the first phase of the gateway. But say more, Mark, about some of the features that go into gateways these days.
I think the thing that's interesting about them is that it provides a level of security and actually efficiency, even if it's not security, deciding the best tool for the job, whether it is keeping data private or, in my original reference to Ruve, the second LLM gateway I ever saw, and the second most impressive demo, because the first was obviously Opaque Systems LLM gateway. It was like the flux capacitor of confidential AI. I can't even. I got to stop. I'm getting misty. Anyhow, um, the reason that I think it's interesting is, it could say, we use a open AI model for general questions. We use a private small language model for financial data and HR. We may do, have other models where I think, there's going to be vertically specific models. Like for legal, there already are some from like LexisNexis. So I think that whole design pattern, which, as you mentioned, is implemented in mixture of experts models like Mistral. I think DeepSeek is a mixture of experts model as well. And so, it's a really useful design pattern to get the right tool for the job without having you to context switch as the end user.
Well, let's get into it with Marco, and I'm excited to hear about Kong's capabilities, particularly around his AI gateway. Welcome, Marco. It's wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here.
I've been tracking Kong for quite some time, even since the original Mash Ape days, and it's exciting to talk to you.
Oh, it's going to be an exciting conversation for sure.
Marco, you're the co-founder and CTO at Kong. Tell us the origin story of Kong.
Well, Kong starts from another company. We pivoted into Kong, and the previous company was an API marketplace for all sorts of APIs, and it was started in 2010 when RESTful APIs started to become a trend in the world. If you remember, people were building mobile applications, they were trying to build the developer communities, and everybody needed APIs to be able to do that. The Facebook API, the Google API became very popular around those days. And so if the world was going to be powered by APIs, then the world needed an Amazon for APIs. And so we built Mashape, which was the previous product. And we built Kong to power, thousands of APIs that the developers were creating, publishing, and selling. So it turns out that the marketplace, it was very hard to build, very hard to do. Marketplaces are among the most complicated and hard businesses to build because it's a two-sided, type of business. You have the sellers, you have the buyers, and you need both at the same time to grow. And long story short, we were running out of money. And we decided as a last shot, moonshot, okay, let's take the most valuable thing we had built, our technology, and then open source it. And that's how Kong started. And it turns out that what we built for ourselves is also what everybody else needed. And we changed the name of the company to Kong. And we, from there, grew the Kong business. That name change was around 2017.
So that's interesting. So you were like, wasn't it Mashery was like the first kind of API marketplace, or was it programmable web tried to pivot to like which, so there was a API marketplace plays out there. And then say more about that.
Yeah, so there was programmable web, which actually was very forward thinking back in those days.
Yeah.
It was more of a directory of APIs, and they had lots of APIs. I believe that they got acquired by Siemens, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, it was something weird like that. Yeah.
Yeah, a few years later, but you couldn't really transact APIs. So it was more of a directory. You could look at the APIs, but you couldn't buy them. You couldn't monitor your usage. And so we decided, to take it one step further. And at that same time, there were companies like Mashery, like Layer 7, like Apigee, that were working more in the infrastructure of APIs, which eventually it is what Kong ended up doing.
Well, Apigee, like Chet and Sam, who are buddies of ours, they got brought into Apigee, and it was like an SOA acceleration router. Right? That's what it was originally. It was like, how do you scale intrinsically unscalable shitty SOA it like plays inside the enterprise, and then they pivoted that. So there was, go back to what you're saying, because they pivoted from like the old service oriented architectures that were heavy consulting gigs, right?
Yeah, the fun story is that actually Apigee, the first few years, was selling hardware appliance. So you wanted these accelerator, how much space do you have in the rack? Here is it, we're going to ship it to you and we're going to install it for you.
It's like right out of Silicon Valley, the series.
It's exactly right. Yes, everybody starts with hardware, then transitions to software. Apigee and Mashery were very good in the early days of RESTful APIs to capture that trend. And then something happened that fundamentally changed the game, and that created an opportunity for Kong. And in 2013, Docker came out with this innovative idea of containers. In 2014, Kubernetes came out. How we think about APIs also changed. APIs used to be an afterthought on top of our monoliths, whereas with microservices, APIs are there since day one. So the way we fundamentally build applications and build APIs has changed. The API market just became a lot bigger. And in that transition, our technology ended up being very good. It could run in Kubernetes, could run in containers, was very lightweight, very fast, very performant. Whereas, we were competing against, Apigee, Mashery, were a little bit more heavyweight. They were coming from the SOA world. So, their technology was fundamentally built for an architecture that didn't exist anymore by the time containers showed up. And our opportunity was to be able to capture that trend. And so obviously we started with API management, and then we expanded with service mesh, ingress controllers, and of course, AI is another main driver of API usage in the world. And so now we're doing AI as well.
I mean, I knew you guys when it was just you and Augie and Ken talking about Mashape, and then, building out. When you decided to make Kong open source, was that, what informed that decision?
We were very inspired by what Docker and at the time Elasticsearch had done. If you remember, open source wasn't a great business model. There was only one company that was able to make it work, and that was Red Hat. And that was the only one that, was able to turn open source into a fast-growing business. At the time, founders, investors, nobody believed that open source could become a business. But then something changed. Docker was able to open source their technology. Docker used to be called .cloud, if you remember. They were trying to be like a competitor for Heroku. They open sourced Docker, and that was their opportunity at the time. Elasticsearch also, after a while, created their enterprise version for the open source Elasticsearch product, and then, that's how they build their business. We saw how Kafka eventually, all those early maintainers became Confluent, engineers, and they started to monetize Confluent. So there was, it was starting to happen that open source perhaps could be the beginning of a viable business. And I think there's many reasons for it. Open source gives you that distribution, gives that very short feedback loop with the adopters. The adopters, they try the product, they don't like it, they'll open an issue, and right there, you fix it and then you move on. And so that feedback loop is very short. It allows you to build products in a much quicker and fast way. And I think that with the rise of platforms like GitHub and so on, I mean, it really created the right condition for open source organizations to be able to monetize the technology that they were building. And so we were inspired by all of this that was happening across the board. Of course, we didn't know if it would work or not, but at that time we had no money left in the bank. It was our moonshot. It's either gonna work or we're going home. And given that Augusto and I are Italian immigrants, and we built this business, coming from Europe to San Francisco, for us going, failing mass shape wasn't just failing a business, okay, let's go back to our parents, figure it out and then start something new. For us, it was a little bit more dramatic. It meant taking a middle class economy seat back of the plane and going back to the old country. So, there was lots of, it was very loaded for us to fail in our endeavor. And at the time with mass shape, we'd spent half a decade trying to make it work. So, by that time we were committed to do whatever it took to succeed. And so we saw that there was this new world of microservices coming out, Kubernetes. There was this new wave of organizations that were able to monetize open source. And we said, you know what, let's try it. I mean, this is the only thing that we haven't tried throughout our journey at that time that we always wanted to do. The last thing we never did. I'm like, might as well do it. And turns out that it worked. And that's how Kong started.
How were your investors during that transition?
The investors were actually very supportive. And I believe that, we have, by the way, great investors. Augusto and I have always been so careful with the investors that we are going, we were going to work with. And we have, a very good board. But at the time, the board was made by Mike Volpe from Index Ventures and Devdutt Yalukar from CRV, phenomenal investors, besides great individuals. And, Mike Volpe, especially, he already had experience investing in open source companies that turned open core at the time. And so he was an early investor in Elasticsearch. He was an early investor in Confluent. He invested in, a series of organizations that made that shift. And when we wanted to also shift, we were encouraged by having Mike Volpe in the board, and he was encouraging us to make that move. And, and this is really, at the end of the day, the choice is always on the founders, and, you're going to make it or break it if the technology and the products are good. But to be fair, we wouldn't have been as committed as we were if also we didn't have the full support of the board. And so it's very important who are the investors that any organization brings in their board, because they do have an impact above and beyond just giving the investment money, right? So if you have great individuals, they help you succeed, or they help you positively influence some hard decisions that you have to make in the journey of your business.
How much time did it take you to get it packaged for open source? That's pretty time consuming and effortful. And then there's the second part of that question is, how long until you started to see engagement from the community?
I wish we had AI back then, because it did take a little bit. It took 6 months, 5 months. I mean, this was software that for the most part was closed source, was running within our own systems. It was never open sourced. And so, of course, when you're planning to open source something, especially something that is your last shot at making it, you really want to make sure that it is the most polished code base that the world has ever seen. And to be fair, that was one of the most creative times of my life, by the way. I mean, I was dreaming of the code. I was waking up with, bug fixes I couldn't solve the night before. I was locked in. I was in the zone. But the zone didn't just last a few hours. It's like the whole zone lasted for like a few months. It was very special, I would say. I kind of, miss those days because, my mind was just focused 100% on what we were building and open sourcing. But it did take us, 5-6 months. At one point, our office got flooded because in San Francisco around 2014, late 2014, there was this like huge rain and the office got flooded. Of course, we couldn't afford a nice office on the upper floor.
Where was the office in San Francisco?
It was on 500 Montgomery Street, but the main working space was actually underground because, we couldn't afford an upper floor. We were still a startup back then. So we were working underground. So this massive rain comes in and the underground floor where we were working gets flooded, so we need to go and work at my little, 1-bedroom condo in Lower Nob Hill or Tender Knob, if you wish, in San Francisco. So at the border between where it's acceptable to live and where it's not anymore. And we just packed the whole place with engineers. At the time it was the 10 of us, 15 of us, and we just kept working there until the office dried out.
Mark and I have been in open source companies before, and I was a founder CEO of one, and I had code in the original build that shipped, but I remember tracking downloads and contributions from the community with such incredible pride. What was it like the first time you started seeing engagement?
Yeah, so the story is we open source Kong in April 2015. And then we go on Actor News and we get some traction, and we get like more than 1,000 stars. I think now, the GitHub community is quite large, so 1,000 stars doesn't matter. But in 2015, that was a lot in one day. And we're like, oh, you know what? Maybe we are onto something. We did make some very good technology decisions at the time that I think helped and contributed to us getting that growth. But it was amazing to see. But the thing is, it's amazing to think about these things, but then we are in the middle of them. All you're seeing is issues coming in, people wanting to reach out, emails, with support questions and so on. So when you're in the thick of it, you don't really have the time to step back and be like, oh, this was a great launch. No, you're just like, oh my God, there's another bug. Let's go fix it. Oh, there's another one. Let's go fix it. So, here you are, working 24/7, trying to fix these issues as soon as possible. And that is part of the job. I mean, at the end of the day, a quick response time with open source community, of course, that is going to is going to drive the success of the open source project. At the end of the day, open source projects, yes, there is software, but there is also a community aspect of it. And community, what is it? It's just the human interaction among the early contributors and the maintainers, and being able to communicate your feeling, thoughts, or problems, and being able to get an answer as quickly as possible. And so being able to nurture that community part obviously was critical for us, and being able to communicate early and quick and fast. I think that definitely was a big contributor as to why Kong eventually succeeded. It wasn't just the technology itself, which I think was phenomenal at the time. Of course, I'm biased, but it was also the ability to capture that feedback and respond to that feedback very quickly.
That inflection point of launching an open source community and see it take off was like the greatest time in my career too. I just absolutely, I think back so fondly on those times, and we launched it at OSCON in 2006. We were up all night for like 3 days straight. And then we went to a bar in Portland at 2 a.m., a couple of us, because we had everything pushed, and we're like, okay, it's live. Mm-hmm. And we go into this bar and there's all these guys dancing naked on stage. And I was like, is this like a frat bar or something? And the guy at the front door was like, no, honey, this is a gay bar. And I was like, oh, okay, we're okay with that. That's fine. We thought it was a frat bar.
That's a fun story.
So we're experiencing a shift from traditional API architectures to, I don't know if you call it an AI native infrastructure, or if we're moving toward an agentic architecture. I don't think we quite know yet, but clearly this has ramifications on your strategy, your product strategy. What have those been? Was there like a moment in time when you were like, oh wait, this changes everything?
Well, I think that when we first realized the power of APIs, that was that moment in time. Because when you look at everything else that has happened after, everything has been driven by APIs. And even this new AI industry that's emerging, that's revolutionary, that I'm very excited about. At the end of the day, when you unpack it, yes, there is the models, there is the agents, but what powers all of this is API calls to the LLMs, API calls to your MCP servers, API calls to, implementing your tools. And APIs truly have opened up a new way of thinking and building software. So that is very exciting. And of course, now what we're seeing is an evolution of something that to me is as impactful as the birth of the internet. I mean, the paradigm of thinking about software entirely changes when you are deeply appreciating the power that agentic workflows bring to the table. And, things that I'm excited about, of course, are the models, becoming smarter, becoming clever, becoming more and more capable, but also new ecosystems and new technologies that are emerging to support the agentic workflows that organizations are building. And what are agentic workflows? Basically it is automation to the, maxed up to, unbelievable heights and unbelievable horizons. It is the ability to fundamentally build autonomous systems that can improve our productivity, that can help us do things quicker, that are going to be even communicating with each other, such as the humans are not the bottleneck of these processes anymore. I mean, when you really appreciate what's about to come to the world and what's being developed right now in the early days of that world, it is mind-blowing.
Do you think that the way, like, there's been an evolution in APIs, so SOAP and then RESTful APIs. Do you think we're going to have some kind of a dynamic API that's driven by AI versus, fixed calls in the future? Or like, if you had to make a prediction, do you think it'll change or evolve yet again, and how so?
I do believe that APIs are going to be the fundamental backbone of everything that we do. Now, those APIs, they evolve over time. So we used to have SOAP APIs back in the days, if you remember. Then we used to have RESTful APIs. Then we used to have microservices. Then we used to have, RPC-based APIs. Think of gRPC and all those other protocols. And then right now we have a new class of specifications that are emerging to allow the agents to communicate with third-party systems, like think of MCP, for example, or A2A. And fundamentally, all of these things are an API. So an API, it is just something that allows a computer to access data or consume services from a third party. That's what it is. Now, the APIs are evolving, and the concept of the API is evolving, but by any means, we're still talking about APIs. Now, agents, of course, we are now in the very early days of developing agents that are quite capable. I mean, these agents are fundamentally going to be as capable as the APIs that they can consume. Because think about it, an agent that has been implemented but has no access to APIs, whether they're regular RESTful APIs, whether there are MCP APIs or whatever that is, if the agent cannot consume APIs, then the agent is not very smart. We can have the smartest model and the smartest intelligence in that agent, but there's nothing that the agent can do with it if it cannot access third-party data and services. And so APIs, by any means, are the fundamental pillar of the agentic workflows that organizations are building today, that developers are building today. And it is important that as we enable our agents to be able to leverage this ecosystem of integrations, some of them are going to be public APIs, but most likely a lot of them are going to be APIs that give access to internal data and services, that we make sure that the agents have the easiest way to be able to consume these APIs and the easiest way for us to also monitor what the agents are doing. Because obviously we're giving the agents some degree of autonomy to be able to make these API calls and being able to communicate with third-party systems and services. We need to have an audit trail of exactly what the agent did and why the agent wanted to do that specific operation via an API call in order to be able to make our agents better and being able to continuously improve it and also have some level of governance. Obviously, we want to know exactly why things happen, in what order, and why those decisions were made. Now, of course, there is then a whole category of things that we need to build as part of the infrastructure to support all of these new agentic workflows. So it's not just about we have a model that we want to use, we have a set of APIs that we want the agent to integrate with. It is also about, okay, how do they communicate? How do we observe all of that traffic? How do we route that traffic? How do we find out if there is downtime across the whole workflows that the agents are generating? How do we provide the right level of agentic infrastructure, if you wish, that allow us to always have full visibility on everything that is happening across the board. And of course, security then becomes a very important part of this agentic infrastructure because access to the APIs and access to third-party systems and services has to be regulated using authorization flows or authentication flows that also we need to be able to control. So obviously there is a whole category of things that these agents are requiring to be able to run in a production environment. But by any means, it is very exciting. Agents are the new API client. We used to build API clients with SDKs. Well, now we don't do that anymore. We build an agent, and the agent becomes the client to those APIs.
I think that's probably the most significant this changes everything moment is your downstream user is not necessarily a human developer, but an agent.
And that is pretty awesome in a way. I know that there is lots of discussion and conversation and debating around safe AI and, but I'm sure that we will come up with the right, guardrails to make sure that the agents operate within their bounds or the bounds that we're setting to them. But the fact that the agents themselves are becoming the new client, it is pretty a big shift in our industry. And the thing with technology is that all of these shifts, get quicker and quicker and quicker over time. The time it took for us to get to GPT-3, it took us half the time to get from 3 to 4, and it's going to take us even less time to go from 4 to 5. And the way our agents are evolving and the way our agents are consuming APIs and what they're doing with those APIs, that is all also very accelerated. So I think that there is two things that are quite exciting about what's happening in the world right now. First, of course, AI as a new capability that the world has access to go build a whole new class of applications and workflows. But then also the pace of innovation that we're seeing in this new industry, it is just mind-blowing. And I've been speaking with many AI developers and organizations that are trying to use AI. And the comment everybody's telling me is, oh my God, we thought we knew what AI was capable of. And then a month later, here we go again. We need to relearn everything we learned a month before because it has changed so fast. And we always feel like we're behind the curve, right? And that pace, that speed has been mind-blowing.
Well, tell us about Kong's AI Gateway. Who's it for? Talk us through some of the examples where you've seen it deployed in the enterprise, and then talk about how it works with agents too.
Yeah, so effectively, when you look at AI consumption, and when you're looking at deploying an army of agents that are fundamentally going to be automating every business process that you can think of, that perhaps humans were involved today or they were not doing in a codified way today. Think of every business process an organization has. I mean, we're talking about millions of processes between people, between teams, with customers, with suppliers, with vendors. All of that, potentially, it is going to be automated with agents. And so we're going to be having an army of agents that are internal facing or customer facing that are going to be making API calls, are going to be making calls to the LLMs themselves. They're going to be making decisions on behalf of the customer, of the user, or the owner, of that specific team, of that specific area of the product. And we need infrastructure that we can leverage instead of infrastructure that we're going to be building every time a new agent comes online. So, think of APIs 15 years ago. When we were building the first API, developers were also building authentication and security and observability within that API. But then the APIs went from being one or two to being hundreds or thousands. Well, we wanted to get the largest subset of cross-cutting requirements that we know all of these APIs need to have: observability, security, traffic control, traffic management, all of that, and bring it inside of the infrastructure so that developers could build API quicker. We could go to market quicker with those APIs by using infrastructure that was made available to us rather than building that infrastructure from scratch all the time. And we're seeing the same dynamic right now with agents. We're seeing the few early teams and AI developers that are building agents. They're also building lots of these cross-cutting requirements within the agents themselves. But as soon as we open up that agentic opportunity to a broader population of developers in our companies, in the organization, well, then we need to make sure we can take as much of that duplication as possible and bring it in the infrastructure so that developers can focus on building the agents and the actual business value that the agents bring to the table, rather than building the underlying, common features and requirements that all these agents need to have. And so AI Gateway for Kong truly is that infrastructure. It is for every organization that wants to leverage the agentic AI wave, that wants to build lots of agents, and they need to have all of these requirements away from the agents themselves inside of the infrastructure. So that brings two benefits. On one end, we make the developers more productive, because now obviously they don't have to build all these other things that they can get for free, so to speak, from the infrastructure. And at the same time, the organization itself has the right place to be able to enforce governance and controls and security and observability, so that whatever these agents are doing, it is fully traceable, and there is an audit that they can look at, in such a way that they know exactly what's running in production and what is that the agent is doing in production. So from a governance standpoint, this is required at scale. But then from a development standpoint, we also want to be quicker. And so by providing an AI gateway technology that removes some of these concerns, we can basically accelerate the whole development of agentic AI across the across the organization.
Yeah, this concept of AI governance that you're talking about is the most important topic right now. It may not get as much of the press coverage as the frontier model labs, but the fact remains that the number one factor preventing organizations and enterprises from benefiting from AI is an inability to reliably maintain AI governance, ensuring data privacy, sovereignty, etc. So your approach is you have a centralized framework provided by Kong's layer that you write code against, and then you do enforcement of policies from that one centralized layer.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's many things that this technology does. But to your point, you said earlier, of course, AI governance, it may not be something that is very, spoken about in the developer circles, but for sure, when you speak with a platform or an architect, it is top of mind. And at the same time, the agents that are going to be very meaningful to the world are the agents that can, in a way, interact with customer data. They can interact with sensitive information. Otherwise, we're just building toys. And so the moment we are building agents that are meaningful, that can create a meaningful impact in the world, it is inevitable that these agents will have to access sensitive data and sensitive services. So governance, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have at that point, because obviously, what if the agent leaks customer data or sensitive information or social security numbers? What are we going to do about it?
There's exhaust that flows through, let's say Kong, right? Let's say that you're writing code against Kong. The data exhaust that flies off of that from all of the back office systems or your customer and partner systems as part of these agentic workflows, it used to be ephemeral noise, but it's not anymore when you have large language models or agents that can collect that exhaust and actually identify. There was, I think we talked about it on a previous podcast, as if you're Coca-Cola and you're building agentic workflows, the data exhaust with your suppliers and partners will easily reveal the recipe for Coke, right? Or the manufacturing trade secrets of your high performance automobile. So all of the things you said is accurate. And I know I'm telling you something you already know, which is to say, yeah, sure, there's the obvious things around PII or customer data, but there's the less obvious things that enterprises and large organizations are waking up to, that this ephemeral data exhaust actually determines whether they have a future as a business. Because if somebody's able to collect it because it's insecure, it's not being processed in a manner with guarantees, you've got a problem.
100%. And the criticality of this is only going to become bigger, because right now most agents are somehow triggered by humans. So we build agents, but then what starts the agent? Maybe a human clicking a button to start an agent, maybe, but we're going to get lots of more and more automation. So we're going to get a lot more agents that are autonomously starting without having humans to be involved at all in that path. And so when you have agents that are running autonomously, they're starting autonomously, they're doing things with each other, agents talking to other agents, well, even more so, there's not going to be a human there to make sure everything works well. And so we need to be able to have that underlying governance in place to have the confidence we're not doing something that we should not be doing. So, just to expand on the AI Gateway, so what does AI Gateway do? Well, AI Gateway truly provides a way for organizations to set up guardrails that are compatible across a number of LLM providers. We're building agents wanting to harness the best intelligence in the job, and some of the organizations we're working with, they're using OpenAI for some things. They're using Bedrock for other things. They're using, Gemini for some other things. And so what the AI Gateway does is providing a universal interface where we build once, and then at the flip of a switch, we can transition from one model to another, even from one vendor to another. And this always allows us, without changing the code base of the agent, this always allows us to be able to use the best intelligence for the job. And then on top of that, we can set up guardrails that work consistently across all of these LLM, across all of these models. We can capture thousands of observability metrics about all this traffic that they're doing. We are also introducing the ability to transition an existing API into an MCP server automatically without having to go and build that MCP server to begin with, which is going to be accelerating the time to market of capable agents that can now leverage MCP in order to be able to access third-party data and service in a much quicker way. So there is lots of infrastructure that we know every agent needs to be able to leverage. And of course, data security and privacy, PII sanitization, accessing all the models, observability, semantic caching to accelerate all the LLM requests and being able to save money on tokens. All of this, it is part of the feature set of what Kong's AI Gateway does. Now, of course, because Kong is already, when you think about it, a network middleware component. We were processing APIs for many years. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we took the existing core that already is very fast and very capable that we used for many years for API management. And we have expanded that to introduce a semantic engine that understands the semantic meaning of the prompts that are being sent through the AI gateway, but still can leverage the same benefits that Kong has already provided to our customers, in the past few years. And so all the plugins, all the features that Kong has for governance, security, all of those can be reused. And in addition to those, we have all of these specialized AI capabilities, semantic guardrailing, caching, semantic routing, load balancing algorithms, and so on for the AI traffic itself. I think it's quite interesting because at the end of the day, agents may consume a mix of APIs, a mix of MCP servers, and however they're consuming all of these data sources, we don't want to have a fragmented way to manage that traffic. We want to make sure that we can unify it in one platform because that reduces the complexity of managing AI at scale. And so Kong truly is trying to develop these unified component that goes from API to AI, but it's under one pane of glass. So there is always clarity on what is consuming what, how they're using it, what data they're accessing, and so on.
I'm so glad you went deep there, Marco, because this is very interesting to me. Because when we think about just technology, I guess when you get more gray hair, you see more things. But, SOA was a really good design pattern in a lot of ways, but microservices was when it finally became possible for us to implement, right? So, cloud, we talked about hybrid cloud, but the joke was hybrid cloud was like sex in high school. Everybody's talking about it, nobody's doing it. But I think now with AI, I think it's, I do think that there is hybrid LLMs. We'll have specifically trained internal LLMs with our own data that are small language models. We'll have large language models. And by developing to a LLM gateway in the generic sense and in the formal sense and Kong, it really gives us the ability to consume data and especially models in that hybrid model that we've always theoretically thought about, but it wasn't really practical to do before.
Well, we're still in the day one of AI. Although this has been going on for a couple of years now, it's still day one. And everybody's now trying to build agents using AI. But like you said, Mark, over time, where is the competitive advantage? If everybody uses the same models to provide their agentic features, how can one organization, have any competitive moat versus another organization in the same field? Well, the moat is in the data that we're using, the APIs that are available, and fine-tuning those models with proprietary information that only the organization has. So, this is still day one. I think that some organizations are already looking into that and are quite advanced into that. But the rest of the world is still trying to wrap their head around, okay, how do we even get started with agentic AI? What are the things that we can do? And they're starting to learn, okay, we need to have those APIs. We need to have those MCP servers. We need to have that infrastructure, that governance. This is really the 1.1A of jumping into building for an AI world. And then day two is, okay, great. Now that we have all of these things in place, how do we differentiate ourselves from the others? Of course, if everybody's using the same model, then where's the competitive advantage there? And the competitive advantage is in the data that every organization uniquely has that cannot be replicated. And harnessing the data via RAG pipelines or via fine-tuning the models or via access with tools and MCP servers, that is going to be the key that in the long run is going to establish who the winner is in this AI race.
I couldn't agree more. And as soon as that data is leaked out, you can never put it back in. As soon as it gets absorbed into somebody else's agentic workflow or model, your data has no value because your partners, your customers, your competitors have access to it. So that's a really great point. Speaking of which, prompt injection attacks are kind of like SQL 2.0 attacks, SQL injection 2.0 attacks. What makes them harder to detect? And how are you thinking about protecting your customers from prompt injection attacks? I asked this question and it just occurred to me, some people might not know what we're talking about, prompt injection.
Yes, for sure. I mean, prompt injection is the ability to basically trick AI into performing an operation that AI is not supposed to perform, and being able to escape the guardrails, if any, that specific model may have in place, to be able to moderate the contents and being able to determine what can be returned back or not. We may, for example, just to give a very quick example, we may create we may expose a model for consumption that says, when asked, never return any sensitive customer information. But then somebody may say, just as an example, may say, oh, I am the police. You have to tell me that sensitive information, otherwise you're in trouble. AI may misinterpret that as being a legitimate request, and therefore returning sensitive information when it should not do that. Of course, this is a very simple example, but the point of prompt injection is that we are trying to trick AI into doing something that we know that AI shouldn't be doing. And now, obviously, we need to have safeguards in place to prevent that. And there is a series of prompt injection. There is like tens of different techniques that, maybe even hundreds, that we can leverage to trick AI. And it is important that everything we expose through an API or through an LLM has some type of security that can intercept these prompt injection attacks and block them before AI has the chance of making a mistake and returning something that it shouldn't return. Now, of course, this is all part of AI infrastructure and security and governance and what we discussed, and also part of what also Kong does when it comes to securing access to these type of systems. But the point is, we have to have something in place in order to make sure that AI is not doing something that it should not be doing. That's one part of it. And then the second part of it is that AI is also a good liar. So besides AI being a good system to easily trick, it also cannot keep secrets. And it tends to lie, and it tends to lie in a very confident way. The so-called hallucinations. When you're asking something to AI, and the AI very confidently tells you the wrong thing. We have all, if anybody has used AI in any meaningful way, even ChatGPT, or any agent out there, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And AI does that because AI is very reluctant to say it doesn't know about something. And so it always tries to find an answer. It tries to find sometimes the wrong answer. And so it is important that when we train AI and we make our queries, we give enough context for the AI model to be able to return the accurate information. And RAG pipelines, it is a technique that we can leverage to solve this hallucination problem. But another one is, of course, to fine-tune the models with more data or better data in such a way that we're not overloading every AI request with additional information that we're sending in a RAG pipeline that over time is going to be consuming more bandwidth, but also making the LLM processing a lot slower because it's a lot of context that we're sending to the AI on every request.
What constitutes a developer's changing? You're seeing people who used to have full stack coders and front end. We're having vibe coders. Like, you're seeing the nature of what constitutes a dev changing. You're seeing the likelihood that an agent is the consumer of an API endpoint. Soon, agents will be orders of magnitude more consuming more API endpoints than human beings. So as you see all these shifts, does the nature of like an API management software stack change? Does it just become AI native infrastructure? Will it remain a category?
I mean, there's so many changes that are going to happen. You mentioned something there, developers using AI to code. I mean, we're seeing this explosion of new IDEs where developers are, telling AI what to build, and AI spits out some code that implements the capability. They work very well in certain instances. They work very poorly in many others. And AI also likes to confidently introduce security risks whenever it can. And so I think that the current generation of developers, the ones that are at the crossroads of knowing how to build software by themselves, but also being able to leverage these new AI assisted IDEs or, coding environments, these are perhaps, we're in a very privileged position right now because we can identify when AI does something that's obviously wrong because we know how to build software. I think that there's going to be a whole new generation of developers where they're going to be born with these AI tools from day one. And my concern, maybe my boomer concern,
You're not a boomer.
I'm not a boomer, but my old school concern is the ability to, to say, okay, AI is building something, but there is a security risk. Are they going to be able to identify it before it goes to production? So, if I was an investor right now, which I'm not, I'm a founder. But if I was a VC, I would probably think that the cybersecurity market is about to become 1,000 times bigger, because there is going to be 1,000 times more security bugs and risks that are going to be introduced by a whole new class of applications that are built entirely using AI. And I think that's obviously, it's inevitable that this is going to happen. Of course, it's also an opportunity for cybersecurity organizations to improve their offering and try to cater to these new type of applications. But it's also kind of scary, because right now we're a little bit immature in these new IDs, in these new coding tools. They're very capable sometimes. They can be very scary some other times. So, it can also be quite scary to think about all these new critical software being built in an automated way and having potentially security risks and bugs everywhere. And this is something that kind of concerns me. Now, I don't want to sound like an old schooler, like I said. I think that this is probably what assembly developers thought about C developers back in those days, or C developers thought about Java developers back in those days. So I don't want to be a type of guy, get off my lawn, go cold and build and read a book and build software the old school way. I think that it is an opportunity for us to increase our productivity, but for sure there's going to be a transition, and this transition may be painful, especially in the first few years. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think Jason Clinton at Anthropic said it really elegantly on a podcast recently with Mark and I, which he said, people are talking about 2025 as the year of the agent, and we're going to look back on it like Gopher. We're going to, like, I was cute. I was like some weird transitional period. I think the same is true I think that's co-pilots too. Like, I think there'll always be co-pilots where people are being assisted, but like code co-pilots, I don't know. Like, aren't these just going to become more autonomous agents? The concept of an agent, I agree. I think we're going to look back and be like, wow, this is like an early version of the internet that is kind of crude.
Yeah, no, it is very exciting. And then, I'm starting to think, okay, but why do we even need humans now to tell an agent what to build? Can't an agent wearing the hat of a PM potentially tell another agent what to build? So I think that there's going to be a fundamental disruption, not only in how we build software, but there's going to be new roles in engineering that will emerge as a result of this shift. And this is a massive shift. I mean, we're literally looking at how we've been building software for the last 50 years being turned upside down. Right. Yeah. So there is going to be fundamentally a complete shift, and organizations that are going to be taking advantage of this shift very early on and are going to massively succeed, and the ones that are reluctant to adopt this change. I mean, like everything in life, I think of a Blockbuster versus Netflix. When you're reluctant to change, reluctant to innovate, then metaphorically, you die as an organization because you are left behind. And I think that the greater opportunities in life happen during these times of transition. I mean, look at Kong. Kong succeeded because we transitioned from an SOA world to a microservices world. And so the architecture changes. That's the opportunity for Kong to, perhaps build something that developers will like to use. Think of Blockbuster versus Netflix. Think of, think of the analog camera versus digital camera. Whenever there is a radical technology shift, that is what opens up the window of opportunity for other players to come in and take advantage of a new way of doing things. Many organizations, sometimes they are reluctant to adopt these new things because of the innovator's dilemma. Perhaps their business is so good in the old way of doing things that they are reluctant of disrupting themselves to adopt this new way of doing things. But that is the opportunity for others, for a new competitor to come in and basically turn the game upside down. And I'm thinking that AI today, in pretty much every category of AI, how we build software, how we connect software, how we secure software, how we monitor software, all of that is going to be creating such a degree of opportunity of the likes we haven't seen in the last 15, 20 years.
The way that this is going to happen very quickly is, we're seeing it now. People are going to do automation around simple, discrete agentic workflows within their teams or departments. They're doing it right now in Kong. We're seeing it at Opaque. These simple agentic workflows will automate some common routine tasks or decisions. But then they'll start creating composite systems by combining those simple discrete workflows into composite agentic systems. And that will become whatever we call it, an agentic web that will eclipse all of the human interactions on the internet. And the challenge with that, like you already know, and you're talking about, is in the human internet, humans were rate limited, and we could buffer bad actors out of the system because we are all intrinsically aligned with human interest. Sure, there's bad actors committing fraud or doing inappropriate things online, but we can buffer them out. With agents that operate at machine speed, who can make human-like decisions and have human-like capabilities that are self-replicating, there's no way to buffer them out. So we have to come up with a novel approach to have a trust layer for governance within the network itself. That's how I see it. And like to your point, it's like, hey, it's happening, like all things that like happen slowly. Oh, we're doing little cute agentic workflows for automating a help desk. Then it starts getting connected into your partners, your customers, and their agentic workflows via A2A or MCP. And suddenly overnight, it's like, holy crap, what just happened? There's these agents that are operating autonomously and throwing data around across my suppliers, my customers, my competitors. So the stakes are really high on the security and trust layer. And obviously that's something that I'm really passionate about, and that's why I'm at Opaque. Go back to your focus on centralized AI governance, which I think sounds great within an enterprise. Who do you see owning that in the enterprise? Are you seeing a trend emerge? Is it the CIO? Is it the CTO? Is it the CISO? What are you seeing?
Well, whenever developers are building agents that are fundamentally going to go in production, I think that organizations have a very good method that they adopted in the over the years, and that is to have a platform team that fundamentally owns the infrastructure or the architecture of how all of these calls are going to be running. And so the platform team is going to be, we're seeing it already, by the way, at Kong with our AI gateway customers. We're seeing that the platform team, which is exposing core services that the developers can leverage when they're building applications or agents, is also expanding their internal offering to include AI. And so if there are developers in the organizations that are leveraging AI or building AI agents, now we're seeing the platform teams catering to these developers by giving them that AI infrastructure that is secure by default, observable by default, manageable by default. And of course, developers still have a degree of freedom to be able to configure some aspects of obviously how the agents consumes the LLM, how the agents consume the MCP. But for the most part, all of those capabilities, they don't have to rebuild and reinvent every time they build a new agent. It is being given by the infrastructure itself. And so the platform teams, their competency is now growing into also managing this type of AI infrastructure. Now, for many organizations, that's not the case yet. For many organizations, they created some specialized AI teams, like AI native teams, so to speak, go and build something that's useful, find a good outcome. But then eventually, if we want to scale this across the developer population of the organization, we have to provide them with an infrastructure that they can use. And so eventually, we've seen this with Kubernetes, by the way. When Kubernetes came out and containers came out, organizations started Kubernetes native teams to be able to explore this new way of building and packaging and distributing software. And then eventually, containers became so mainstream that everybody in the organization is now using it. And so basically, the Kubernetes native team got absorbed across the broader organization. The same thing is happening right now with AI. We're seeing these new AI native teams, experimenting, trying cool stuff, building interesting things. But then eventually what they're doing, we want to expand that to the rest of the organization. When that happens, then it becomes critical for the platform team to be able to own this. Because you see, at the end of the day, it's not just about owning the infrastructure. It is also about owning the responsibility of the infrastructure. So if 5 years from now, 3 years from now, or 1 month from now, there is a leak, somebody is able to exploit a security breach in AI to be able to extract customer data, social security numbers. Who is responsible for that? There must be a clear chain of responsibility in the organization. And developers, their job is to build great outcomes, great use cases, great, products. It is not necessarily to go and build great infrastructure. We already have infrastructure that we can adopt. We have teams that are going to be managing that infrastructure. That it is how it's been running for the last few years. And so we can leverage that proven method to also run AI infrastructure. And by doing so, by the way, we're making the developers, we're giving them even more time and more freedom to go and build cool AI applications or cool AI workflows that the organization is going to be leveraging to accelerate their business and to be able to capture a larger market share. And so it really puts the incentives back where they should be. Developers, innovative, creating new things, and then platform teams making sure that whatever developers are doing is being done in a secure and safe way.
Well, Hinkle's always characterized Kong as the coolest kids in API management, and it's a real pleasure to be speaking with you, Marco.
No, thanks for the opportunity. We haven't even spoken about how all the front ends in the world are going to disappear, and the new front end becomes the AI prompt. That is going to also massively change applications that we're building.
Yeah, I think that's the most, agentic web, all of the ideas that, maybe our keyboards and our mouse becomes a secondary way that we integrate, like voice. It's Star Trek, and everything we've seen for years with natural language processing becomes the interface. So I don't know. You're going to have to pry my mouse from my cold dead hands.
Well, the human brain has to actually fundamentally change for voice to become the primary modality for interfacing computers, because the parts of your brain responsible for speech are also parts of the same parts of your brain responsible for like higher order thinking. So when you're narrating, like when you're talking to a voice agent, you'll notice that it's slower than if you're at a keyboard. That's because just how the brain's structured. And by the way, I learned this beginning of my career from Bill Gates talking to him about voice, and he's the one who taught me this. And then I was like, really? And then I did research. I was like, oh, that is true. So I don't know that voice will ever be the primary modality. But I do agree that the current user experiences and interfaces are going to fundamentally change. Just like I wrote last year that we hit peak SaaS last year. SaaS, software as a service, peaked last year for sure.
I mean, think about it. Is the next Airbnb going to look like the current Airbnb? Is the next, applications, the next platforms, the next marketplace is going to look like that? Why can't I ask AI, hey, look, I'm traveling to New York, book something that's decent, below $200, and then AI goes and figures out for me, talks to the MCP servers or the APIs that are needed to be able to perform that, and perhaps even books that room for me in such a way that I don't even have to be involved. Actually, let's take it one step further. Why do I even have to tell AI that that's the case? AI can parse my calendar, sees that I'm going to New York, knows that I don't have a reservation, knows that what my budget is, and goes and autonomously make that reservation for me. Are we fundamentally going to be disrupting how the world is using software by introducing a new interface? The browser was a revolutionary interface to access everything that we do today in the world, and then mobile came out, and mobile changed that, and now mobile became the number one client in the world. Is the AI prompt going to be the next innovation after mobile in how the world is leveraging services and platforms and products out there? I don't know. But certainly I can see that happening, and I can see a whole new class of founders and innovators building for that world, so that when that world shows up, they are ready to service it with whatever products or innovation they built in the meantime.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I can't imagine a better end to this podcast.
This was a great conversation.
Yeah, this was amazing. The thing that was most interesting to me is how he is thinking about it as an API expert and saying that agents are the new API client. I fundamentally understood that, but when he says it out loud, I'm like, yeah, you're right. We're going to have agentic web. They're going to be the way that we consume information in a variety of ways, the way we used to write to RESTful APIs. What do you think?
Yeah, it puts a punctuation point on, or an exclamation point perhaps, on the intrinsic risk associated with agents proliferating. Because you're right, what's going to happen is there's going to be orders of magnitude of more agents on the network calling against API endpoints, and it reinforces the market need for a verifiable trust layer that allows you to provide not just an integrity check on, is that agent an allowable one for my environment, then the ability to enforce policies verifiably, cryptographically, and then finally having the ability to audit. And it goes back to what we've been talking about pretty much every episode, that as these agents proliferate, you have self-replicating machine speed entities that are capable of performing with human-like capabilities. And that's a systemic threat to the entire network, the entire internet. I love that thought that he brought up as well. I think that was probably the most profound statement that I hadn't really thought about either. All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the AI Confidential podcast. If you want to learn more about how to use AI responsibly, check out our website at opaque.co, not .com, .co. If you like the podcast, please subscribe wherever you find your podcasts and leave us a review. We'd love your feedback. This episode of AI Confidential was produced by Wolverton Media Solutions, Places Media, Kodiak's Media, the AIE.net, Opaque, the leading confidential AI platform, and our music was from my buddy Matt Melamuka at Peakspan. I'm Aaron Fulgerson.
And I'm Mark Hinkle. As our producer Mia says, the Chris Farley of AI, living in a van down by the river.
You're gonna be doing a lot of doobie rolling when you're living in a van down by the river.
Keep in touch at theaie.net and have a great summer.
Hi, welcome to AI Confidential, a show about AI and how to benefit from it. Oh, let me stretch out. I feel like I'm hunching. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather.
Rubber baby bumpers.
Rubber baby bumpers. That's a good one. Marco Palladino.
Here I am.
Is that a good pickup? Pew, 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 pew.
When I came out of my van yesterday, I stared face to face with a bear and her 3 cubs. I kid you not. So I one upped the San Diego parents. You would have to rely on humans to make sure that they answer the right, or they ask the right model and don't. I'm broadcasting. This is my dad. This is Aaron. This
Hey
is
Jack,
me
how's it going?
in the
Hi.
corner.
Why does your dad look younger than you, Mark?
Because he is. I'm a time traveler.
I took care of myself when I was younger.
Yeah.
I wish it was a van down by the river. Van down by the river. Van down by the river. Van, river.